All right, in this demo, I talked about configuring a service for discovery, probing for all available services from a client, and then once I've discovered a service that meets the probe request, consuming that discovered service, and then we can also talk about, we also talked about limiting the services of interest using scopes within probes. So let's take a look at ad hoc discovery. So here's my solution. I have a service, and the service implementation isn't important. What is that I provided this new endpoint kind of UDP discovery endpoint, and I've just given him a name of discovery. This basically allows for the service, who is in the business of doing, whatever it was designed to do within its particular domain of concern, but also has now been set up with this UDP discovery endpoint, which means that he can respond to probe requests. I enable that by basically using the service discovery element, and now I've basically switched on the ability for the service to respond to probe requests. So I can go ahead and publish the service to my local IIS. And on the client side, I basically have a client endpoint. I've intentionally left the client endpoint as empty because I'm actually going to discover it dynamically using WS Discovery. And likewise, I have a discovery endpoint here with a kind of UDP discovery endpoint, which achieves that binding equivalence between the discovery client and the discovery service. So really, we have two endpoints on the client and two endpoints on the service. The code within the client itself is pretty simple, but there are some new types here that we discussed during my talk. So discovery client is a new type within the system.service model discovery namespace, which is new to WCF4. I'm going ahead just newing up that client. It's capable of issuing probe requests and receiving probe responses. I'm then going to define my find criteria, which is another type. It's just a basic way to provide the minimum requirements for the services that you're interested in. So at a minimum, you are wanting to match on the contract itself. Service that doesn't match that contract really wouldn't be much use to the client. And then we're adding a scope called foo. I'm setting the match results equal to 1, which basically means that if I find one service endpoint, go ahead and stop waiting. And then I'm going to basically provide that collection of endpoints, in this case it would only be one, based on that find criteria to this find response type. So what's happening here in this line of code is that probe request is going out over UDP in a multicast manner, and then we're basically going to wait for a service or services to respond. Again, in this case, we're only interested in the first service, but you can basically set that to any number that you want. If you don't set max results, I believe it'll wait for 20 seconds according to the standard of the specification. So once find response has been populated with the probe responses, then all I'm going to basically do is I'm going to go ahead and use this first extension method. I'm going to go ahead and grab the address, which is an endpoint address of type system.serviceModel.endpoint address. And now I have the endpoint address that's available for a service for me to consume. The rest of it is very simple WCF. I'm going to instantiate my proxy, and now here's where the really cool magic happens, right? Is that I'm going to inject the endpoint address into the address of my client endpoint, thereby dynamically being able to discover a endpoint at runtime, inject it into my client stack, and call it. So let's actually run that, and I'll debug it so that we can actually look at it as we go. So I'm going to new up my discovery client. I'm going to specify my find criteria. In this case, there's two criterion that I'm interested in. I'm going to set my match results to 1, and now I'm going to go ahead and issue the probe requests. I'm going to sit there and wait. Okay. So we should see here that we did get, actually we did not get a response, so let's actually see why that is. Let me go ahead and, oh, I think I know what happened. So I need to activate the service, right? Because WAS is an activation-based hosting engine. So now that the service is actually alive and kicking, let's go ahead and step through the code again. So discovery client, find criteria, go ahead and issue my probe request. The service now responds immediately, should have a single endpoint. And if I drill into this, you can see here that the address URI is in fact the endpoint that I deployed to IIS. Okay, so now I grab that, I instantiate my WCF proxy, and I'm going to set my address equal to the endpoint address that I dynamically discovered. I'll go ahead and call the service, and we'll see here that it responds back, and we're done. So in this demo, I talked about how to configure a service for discovery, as well as the client, how to send probe requests for available services, how to consume a discovered service once it's been discovered, dynamically setting the client proxy endpoint address to that endpoint address, and then how to get a little more picky in terms of the services that you're interested in discovering.